I'm Madeleine Arnot. I'm Professor of Education at Cambridge University, and I'm attending the E4 conference here in Dakar as an author. I've given a paper in the Violence Stream reporting on research with youth in Ghana, in Kenya and in South Africa. This was a very important paper for us because we brought together the findings of qualitative projects which looked at the different types of violence that youth are engaged in or experience. And we talked about structural violence, the actual violence of living in poverty, street violence, the violence, sexual violence that street youth experience when they live on the street, and really quite appalling data that the young people talk about. Also the violence that young girls experience, if you like, of trying to sell their bodies in order to pay for the school. So there are all different types of violence that we were talking about in the session. What emerged in the session, we had some very, very interesting papers, but one of the conversations I had was particularly striking for me. Was one of the delegates said to me, you know, we have to have projects that have measurable outcomes, that the funding bodies want to know what is effective. Now, when you look at this range of violence and you look at the normalization of violence, you're talking here about cultural change. You're talking here about how people struggle to survive. They have different strategies of survival, different coping strategies. You're talking about different attitudes towards women and whether you should respect women or whether women are your property. These are deeply held assumptions about what is a woman, what is masculinity. And I don't know what a measurable outcome is. And I wonder, looking back on the women's movement, whether we always looked for measurable outcomes. We're now into, if you like, the fourth wave of the women's movement. And the first, second and third waves did not have measurable outcomes. What they did was try to get a climate of opinion in which people changed their attitudes to gender. And the funding was very small. It wasn't through huge donor agencies, it wasn't through international bodies. But what it was a grassroots political movement where women united to try and change the world, and on behalf of women and by women. And so we worked, we talked together, we thought together, we reflected together. And gradually that became part of the media and the communications world, that people started to say maybe we should treat women differently, maybe we should educate our daughters differently. And that I've seen in my lifetime, and that cultural change is not just something that can be measured in statistics. It can't just be measured by funding agencies looking for some good practice. You have to encourage people to talk, to think, to reflect and to take it on personally. And what I find is a missing level where we're talking about who has to change, how will they change personally, how will they reflect, who are the agents of change. And I don't believe in these large agencies of the agents of change. I actually think it's the teachers, it's the women in the community, it's the mothers who start to talk differently. And then you start to get change in personal and social relationships.